Thank you, Benjamin. Hanukkah. Is that in the Bible? Hanukkah this year was November 28th through December 4th, and actually when I looked up the dates, I saw different dates, but that's about when it was, November 28th through December 4th. What is Hanukkah? It's certainly here in South Florida, we get a lot of menorah lights put up in people's windows. We have people at the grocery stores that might say Happy Holidays and Happy Hanukkah. So what is Hanukkah? So in my web research this week, I found something from a website called the Gathering of the Christ Church. I'm going to do a quote from there, the Gathering of the Christ Church. It says, during the time of the Maccabees, and this is somewhere around the 160s BC, the 160s BC, during the time of the Maccabees, Antiochus Epiphanes and the Greeks had defiled the temple of the Most High and made it law that the children of Israel could no longer follow the commandments. Okay, that's sounds like today, where a lot of, especially in Canada, where ministers can't speak from the Word of God. There's actually a minister in Canada that was defying a lot of the mandates because he wanted to actually have assembled services. And so police actually came in, arrested the minister, and so he came down to the U.S. and he went on a speaking tour in the U.S. Now, he had already been put under a gag order in Canada. They actually applied that to what he said in the U.S. So when he left the U.S. and went back to Canada, he was rearrested. Yeah. So they're actually regulating speech not only in Canada, but Canadian citizens around the world. Yeah. So it does sound like some things that we're going through today. Also from that website, it says that the Greeks also stole the vessels from the temple and began to profane the temple by sacrificing swine and other abominations in the temple. The Feast of Dedication, which is another name for, so the word Hanukkah actually means dedication. So Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, is in remembrance of how Jonathan Maccabee led the people into fighting against this tyranny of the Greeks and the rededicating of the temple. So Hanukkah dedication, so Jonathan Maccabee went in and expelled the high priest that was put there by Antiochus Epiphanes. And so nowadays, when you read a little bit about it, it'll say that it was actually just a civil war, that this wasn't a rebellion, it was a civil war between the Orthodox Jews and the Hellenized Jews. Yeah, the Hellenized Jews, the Greek Jews. But Antiochus Epiphanes actually was having people worship Zeus in the temple, and then he substituted his own face for Zeus's face. So he's like, yes, we want you to worship Zeus. I am Zeus. Yeah, I am God is basically what Antiochus was saying. Also in Wikipedia, as Mr. Brown said, Hanukkah is also known as the Festival of Lights because there was a miracle that occurred. It is a Jewish festival commemorating the recovery of Jerusalem and subsequent rededication of the Second Temple at the beginning of the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucid Empire in the 2nd century BCE. Hanukkah is observed for 8 days and nights, starting on the 25th day of Kislev, according to the Hebrew calendar. The festival observed by lighting the candles of a candelabrum with 9 branches, commonly called a menorah. One branch is typically placed above or below the others, and its candle is used to light the other 8 candles. Each night, one additional candle is lit until all 8 candles are lit together on the final night of the festival. And that was coming from Wikipedia. And again, there was a miracle because when they were rededicating the temple, all of the oil that had been in the temple had been defiled except for 1 day's worth. And so they put that oil in there, started burning it, and yet that oil lasted for 8 days. So they call that the Hanukkah miracle. So this is interesting history, but I ask again, is it in the Bible? Is that in the Bible? So today I want to take a look at Hanukkah and what, if anything, we should learn from it. And some of the questions I hope to answer is this one of God's holy days? Did Jesus keep or celebrate this feast of dedication? And finally, is it wrong to keep or observe the feast of dedication? So first question, is it one of God's holy days? And so there we have listed from Leviticus 23, all of the holy days. Don't certainly have time to go through them all here, but they all point to Christ. They all lead to Christ, and they're all done in order. They're steps. They're a progression of God's plan of salvation, bringing mankind back into the family of God. I say back into because there was that one moment in time where Adam and Eve was in the garden and they dwelled with God. Adam and Eve dwelled with God. But then they chose wrong. God kicked them out of the garden. And the whole rest of the Bible has been us trying to get back into that one-on-one personal relationship with God. And this is God's plan to get us back there. They are done in a date order. And they start in the spring, there's a spring harvest, and then they go to the fall, and there is a fall harvest. And it concludes, it is completed in what we call the 8th day, or the last great day. God's plan is complete and lacking nothing. There's nothing missing from this plan and from what these days symbolize. So, no, Hanukkah is not one of God's commanded holy days, as we see listed. And Hanukkah is not anywhere in the Old Testament. So now we move on to my next question. Did Jesus keep or celebrate the Feast of Dedication? Well, Hanukkah, and once again, as it's referred to in the Bible as the Feast of Dedication, is found in only one spot. So we'll take a look at that right now. That's John 10, verses 22 and 23. Now it was the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter. So this is setting a time frame, and this is when Hanukkah usually is. That month of Kislev is usually in the winter. In verse 23, and Jesus walked into the temple and Solomon's porch. That's it. That's all it says. It doesn't say he gave a sermon on rededication. He didn't give a sermon on lights. He didn't talk about the Maccabean rebellion. He was there in the temple on this day. So was Jesus there at the temple that day to celebrate, or was it a coincidence? Let's look at some context. So we're going to go back to chapter 9, and we're not going to read chapter 9, but certainly it's a good chapter and you should read it. But chapter 9 starts out with Jesus healing a blind man. And there's a whole back and forth because he healed this blind man on a Sabbath. That was a really big deal. So in John 9:14 we see, now it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. The Pharisees were not happy with Jesus. They said that because he did this, because he healed someone on the Sabbath, it proved he was not a man of God. And so this was going back and forth all throughout chapter 9, where, as usual, they wanted to stone him. They sought to kill Jesus, and he disappeared from the midst of them and walked out. When we get to chapter 10, and again, remember, chapters are made for our convenience. They weren't there in the original writings. When we get to chapter 10, Jesus immediately is giving a lesson, not a story, a lesson where he is the shepherd, and that people his sheep know his voice. And at the end of this, they start debating. Okay, is this the Son of God? Is it not the Son of God? And so they're going back and forth. Let's pick this up in verse 19. So chapter 10, verse 19. This is the debate, because he said he is the shepherd. He's saying that he's from God, and they're debating. So this is the verses leading up to when he was in the temple on the day of the Feast of Dedication. So, and by the way, if the Feast of Dedication is 8 days, which of the 8 days was he there? Therefore, there was division again among the Jews because of these sayings, and many of them said, he has a demon and is mad. Why do you listen to him? Verse 21, these are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? And so that's why I referred back to chapter 9, We know that Jesus was at the temple on the Sabbath day, and he healed a blind man. And so it would be normal for Jesus to be at the temple on a Sabbath day. And so I think it's more of a coincidence that it was also the Feast of Dedication. And so this is kind of, this verse about the blind man is leading us back to telling us which day of the week it is. It was a Sabbath day. And then it goes into verse 22. Now it was the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. The rest of chapter 10 deals with Jesus teaching the unity that he shares with the Father. Now, this may have actually, for those Pharisees, for those people at the temple that day that were celebrating the Feast of Dedication, this may have drawn back to them the lesson of Antiochus Epiphanes, because Antiochus Epiphanes said he was God, and now you have Jesus saying he's the Son of God. So it is possible with him saying that I am the Father of one. The Father and I are one. I'm in the Father and the Father's in me. Him saying that made them mad. Once again, chapter 10 ends up pretty much the way chapter 9 ended, with the Jews seeking to kill him. Yeah, they weren't happy with that. But nowhere else is the Feast of Dedication mentioned in the New Testament. Jesus never taught to keep it. None of the apostles ever kept it or taught that we should celebrate or keep it. So is it wrong? So we've proven now that it's not one of God's holy days. It's not a commanded day. We've proven that it was not something that was taught in the New Testament, but is it wrong to keep it? Well, we're not required to keep it. Most of us are not physical Jews. I would say nobody in this room is a physical Jew, and I don't know of anybody that's listening on the webcast that's a Jew. So there's no historical pull for us to keep this day. There's no family pull or desire to keep this day. But I will admit that this is similar to National Heroes Day that they have in Jamaica, or Thanksgiving that we have here in the U.S. These are days that we can learn examples from. If you do an in-depth study about what was going on, the abomination of desolation, when that was going on, when the temple was rededicated, there are lessons to learn from that. And certainly we need to make sure that we're not falling into some of the same traps that the Jews of the day were falling into, that split between what they called the Hellenized Jews, they were just Jews. They weren't they were just Greeks. They weren't really Jews. They were just Greeks, and they were following all the Greek mythology and the paganism from the Greeks. So we need to make sure that we're not doing that as well. So we've learned today that Hanukkah is not in the Bible. Neither Jesus nor the apostles actively kept the Feast of Dedication, and they also never taught its observance. In the New Testament, we are taught that Jesus is the Son of God. So again, that's part of that theme of Hanukkah, is that there was a man that put himself in the place of God. But we know that Jesus is, because he was resurrected. We know that Jesus is the light of the world. We're taught that in many places in the Bible. You can go back to John 7 and read that. We're also taught that our bodies are now the temple. Our bodies are the temple. And so this goes back to making sure that we dedicate ourselves and our bodies to being clean, and that we don't internalize any of the abominations of this world. I gave a sermon on abominations earlier this year. You can find that on YouTube. So we need to make sure that we're not defiling ourselves with those abominations. So there are lessons that we can learn from Hanukkah. But there's no need to celebrate that to learn that, because those are lessons that we learn just simply by reading our Bible and going through who is Jesus, what was his purpose. So I will close simply by saying, make every day a day that you dedicate yourself to the one true God.